welcome to this February bullet journal plan with me video. If you're new around here, hi, my name is Anna, and today I have this pretty drawing heavy crows, flowers and gold decorations inspired monthly theme. This is definitely one of my most time consuming themes ever, and it really challenged my drawing skills, so I hope you'll get some inspiration from all of this to your own journals. But we have quite a lot to go through, so let's jump to this cover spread illustration right away. This is the most complicated spread from everything we're gonna create today, and I'll go through this one a little bit slower so you'll get an idea of all the different steps on the process and also see how to draw all these flowers and the bigger crow that's the main focus of this page. So the very first step is to create a pencil sketch for the whole thing, and we'll actually spend quite a lot of time with the sketching phase so that we'll be very confident about all the lines and details before going over everything with the black pens. I started with the bird and I used this beautiful picture I found online as my guide for it. By the way, I always say this in my videos, but whenever you want to draw something a little bit more realistic, I highly recommend finding some reference pictures. Using them is completely normal and something that most artists do because there's just simply no way to draw a realistic bird out of pure memory. But yeah, I focused on just the size and main shape of the crow at this point, and we'll add a little bit more details to it later. But before completely finishing this one, I decided to jump to sketch also some of these flower arrangements around it. So this upper corner will have the biggest flower because I felt like it needed something here to balance out the crow, and I also wanted these flowers to slightly overlap with the monthly title we're gonna create on this page later. When it comes to flowers like these, I honestly recommend doing the exact same thing as with the animals. So find some pictures you can use as your guide, especially until you start to feel more comfortable with the shapes of the petals and so on. On this cover spread, I drew all these bigger flowers facing straight up, and we'll draw some flowers facing to the side on the other pages, but I feel like the top profile is probably the easiest to get started with because it's the most symmetrical in a way. And just a quick tip, I basically drew the same flower a few times in this spread, but you can make them look slightly different by just turning the flower slightly, changing the size, or flipping it over. So if you have that reference picture, just flip it around if you don't want to find a new picture, and it will probably look different enough on the page. But then around these bigger flowers, I decided to draw some of these smaller groups and branches that will add some filler in this arrangement. These are much simpler to draw, and I'll show you here how I drew them a little bit slower. So I like to start with these 5 lines because somehow it's easier than to draw all the petals around them, and the flower automatically looks pretty even. You don't have to be super careful with these petals. I feel like I drew about 1,000 of these small flowers in this whole theme, and they ended up being pretty fast and definitely a lot easier decorations than some of the bigger details. But after these, I also added some more lines to the crow just to figure out the shadows and line work for this one a little bit more before I reached for the Sakura Pigma microns that we'll use for all the outlining. I know I skipped some of the pencil sketching part here and there because I feel like it's a little bit pointless to see me draw everything twice, and also this video would have been way too long if I left everything in. So I hope that's okay for you and you can see everything in the inking phase. But yeah, for me this line art type drawing style, especially shading only using these pens, is not my strongest skill. So I was slowly trying to figure out how to color this bird and how to add these lines. For me, the problem with this style is probably that I'm not patient enough to actually sketch and plan every single feather and part of the body. And I feel like that would definitely be the key for a very polished outcome. But I just ended up drawing these lines a little bit more loosely, and then whenever there was a more shadowy part in my reference picture, I just drew a little bit more lines over there to create a darker appearance. Eventually though, I really felt like I had no idea what I was doing here, and I decided to give up on only using the pens, so we'll add some color to this bird later with watercolors as well. But anyway, now we'll just do the same thing for all the flowers and leaves and outline everything again with the black pen. I think now you can understand how much a good sketch helps us here, because now you can just basically go over everything without thinking about it too much. And I also want to mention that this whole theme was actually super inspired by this amazing bullet journal artist Tia, who you can find from Instagram. She happens to be a fellow Finnish creator, and her work is honestly one of my biggest inspirations in the whole community. I've tried to create a theme like this actually a few times before, but I just always felt like my skills weren't still enough for it. So in a way, finally pushing myself to do this month felt like such a big accomplishment. So I hope that's somehow inspiring or encouraging for you to hear. I sometimes get questions asking how I learned to draw in the first place, or if I went to art school or something, and I didn't do any of that. I've learned everything on my own, and I'm absolutely positive that all of you can do the same. I don't have any special skills or anything. I've just been consistently practicing, and most of that journey is recorded here on my channel. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you to hopefully encourage you to just push forward and keep practicing. But okay, next, as the last part of the sketching phase, we are doing the letters for our title. So I went with this Victorian style font. You can find a lot of inspirations for these letters from Google or Pinterest. There are so many different ways to decorate these. So I just chose to go with some swirls or other fancy stuff that we'll color with a gold paint later. But now it was finally time to color the whole background black, and for this I used these Uni-Posca markers in this whole video. There are some other markers out there as well, but what I like about these is that they don't bleed through the bullet journal paper, and they're also waterproof, so I'll be able to go over them with watercolors without worrying about creating a huge black mess. I always started with these bigger pens to color some of the bigger areas, and then eventually did all the more detailed work around the decorations with the smallest size. You can also use the same microns to color the areas around the flowers especially, and I did it on some of these trickier spots as well. But then the bad point about these pens is that they dry a little bit shiny, which probably doesn't show that much in the video, but in real life these pages definitely look a little bit different than they do on camera. I also had to go through some spots twice, because sometimes these pens were not completely opaque, but for the most part I was very happy how they performed. But anyway, adding the black background definitely changes the whole look for the illustration, which is also why I wanted to do the coloring part last. The black also makes it look like we had way less decorations than I thought, so I actually hoped I added a few more of these smaller flowers here and there. But anyway, I started the coloring by first doing the letters and the border with the gold paint. I've used these same paints in the past and I just really like them. They are super pigmented, and if you layer them a few times, you'll able to get a perfect coverage even over this black background. I still prefer using them on a white background, which is why I decided to work around these letters mostly, but to have that option was definitely useful on some of these parts as well. This tiny brush will make it much easier to create all the small lines and swirls, and I just think that the gold sheen in these paints makes everything stand out so beautifully, and it looks so nice when you turn the pages around in real life. after the gold paints, I started to color the rest of this page, and I decided to use watercolors for this. So I wanted the colors to be pretty muted and nothing super bright or crazy. So I started by coloring these bigger flowers, and I just used these very light beige and grayish tones. Then I added some grayish green tones to the leaves, and finally I also decided to add some red to some of these smaller flowers. I think the red color definitely changed the look of this illustration a lot, and I decided to go with it with the rest of the theme as well. But this is only one of the ways you can color this whole thing. You could pretty much choose to go with any color scheme you want. Then, as I mentioned, I also colored this crow with watercolors, and first I was just adding some black tones to add some of those shadows in here, but then only having the black in here started to look a little bit flat for me, so I decided to add some blue in here as well, just to add a little bit more color to it. I also went over some of the lines and areas with the black pen again, and I did the same thing for some of these flowers as well. And then lastly, we'll finish this small monthly calendar. I wanted to create this gold border around it, and I tried a few different things here, but then eventually decided to go with this pretty simple dot design around it. And then if you'd be interested to purchase a digital version of this whole monthly theme, you can do that by visiting my shop or my Patreon, where I also upload these themes every month. I actually just made some additions to the Patreon tiers, so if you'd be interested in ad-free versions of these videos and some other extra monthly content as well, I'll leave the link to that in the description. But okay, I think I've never spent this much time on a cover spread in the videos, and I know this was a pretty heavy start, but now we can finally move on from it and start setting up a bigger monthly calendar. I decided to start this spread by writing the whole February title, and this time I went with this very classic serif style font. I feel like the decorations this month were so heavy that the theme otherwise required pretty simplistic elements, and I think this type of title is also very useful to have in your bullet journaling skill set. So I started by sketching these letters first with a pencil so that we can get the title perfectly in the middle. And then you could always draw each letter with a ruler if you'd be more comfortable doing that, but I just decided to draw these top and bottom lines with it. It gives a very perfected look to the title in my opinion, if those are all exactly on the same level, but all the vertical strokes don't matter that much, so those I drew with a free hand. Then, as a small last detail, after coloring the letters black, I decided to add these vertical strokes with the same gold paint. I didn't really know how to include any color or other decorations on the calendar side itself because I wanted everything to look pretty minimal. So I think this gold accent here added just something interesting to balance out the rest of this spread and the decorations we're gonna draw soon. But anyway, let's first finish with the calendar side. So I decided to go with this double line style. So I used a little bit thicker pen for the top lines and then a thinner one to draw this line under it. Again, I think this just adds at least something to the page so that it's not completely boring, even though it will still look pretty simple and minimal. But after the calendar, we have this whole right side still empty, and this will be for the decorations on this spread. I wanted to follow the same black style with the flowers and some gold paint. So again, I started by sketching everything out with a pencil and then outlining the sketches with a black pen. I speeded through the flower part a little bit faster on this spread, but I went with these same smaller flowers, and then there's this bigger flower at the top of the page. This time I tried to make sure I have enough of those details, because now I knew that the black background somehow drowns out the details a little bit, but in the end I think there could have still been a little bit more something on this spread. Anyway, then to tie everything together with the crow theme a little bit, I decided to draw these black feathers to the bottom part. I wanted to show these to you a little bit slower, so again we're gonna start with the pencil sketch, and I tried my best to keep the outlines pretty fluffy for these feathers, and I also tried to do that when coloring the black background around them. But then I just drew this border here and started to color this inside with the black markers. I usually skipped these through in the videos because I had to be so close to the page to really see what I was doing, so you would just be staring at the back of my head. But I think it's a pretty straightforward step anyway, it just takes some time and patience. But then we're gonna start by adding some gold here again. So I decided to add this pretty similar border design as we did on the cover spread. And then I used pretty similar colors to color in all the leaves and flowers. Again, I decided to keep the bigger flower pretty light, so I just went with these light brownish tones to add some of the shadows in the deepest folds of the flower. Again, looking through your reference pictures will help you with the placements of the shadows. So I think a big part of coloring flowers is to see where the lights and shadows land in these different folds. Lastly, I added some color also to the feathers, and even though these are supposed to be crow feathers technically, I left them a little bit lighter just so they stand out against the background a little bit better. But that's it for this monthly calendar spread, and then let's move on, and I actually wanted this next whole section to be a little bit easier and faster in terms of the decorations. Somehow this still ended up probably being my favorite part of this whole month, honestly. So I started by creating this simple Dutch door layout here, which I love to use especially when the decorations are a little bit heavier. Just having the Dutch door layouts means that you can fit more stuff on one section, and I just feel like you can get so much more out of your hard drawing work by doing that. But then instead of the bigger flower arrangements, I wanted this spread to be focused on these smaller flower branches. I already sketched them out with a pencil and now just drew everything over with the black pens again. I did the same thing to the bottom part, so the top and bottom will be covered with the decorations, and then it will leave us this middle part with the Dutch door for the actual planning content. I wanted to color the background here black again, but before doing that, I actually decided to write these two titles with the gold paint. As I said before, this paint is pigmented enough to be used on top of the black as well, but I had already sketched out these titles here, so I thought it would be just easier to do it first. So the first 2 pages on this spread will be for the monthly planning, and then when we flip over the Dutch door, we'll have the monthly reflection section on the other side. I actually really liked this cursive font. I left the name of the font to the screen that I mostly followed for it, but I think I ended up changing some of the letters a little bit. Well, anyway, it was a little bit difficult to get the letters completely perfect with the gold paint and this watercolor brush, but coloring the background around them will also allow you to cover and fix any crooked lines. So after the black background was in place again, I outlined these top and bottom sections with this gold border and also focused on these round corner parts that I still left empty. I think doing this just gave a little bit more interesting shape for this spread, and I decided to go with these vertical gold lines that I think somehow created a slightly East Asian style for this spread with the flowers and everything. And then lastly, I also added some of that red color to the flowers again, though I actually think that the black and white kind of worked here as well. But yeah, that finished the decorations on this spread, and now we can focus on the planning part. So as I said, these first 2 pages will be for the monthly planning, and I started by creating this bigger box, which will be just for me to consider the main focus of the whole month. I actually didn't like the title I wrote here, so I covered it with this extra piece of paper. I also colored gold. And then these 2 smaller boxes will be for the secondary task this month. So these will be the ones that I will consider if I have time. And then the other one will be just things to completely leave out and push to the next months. I feel like it's sometimes very easy to think you have way more time than you actually do. So this is just for myself to remind me to not even consider these things, even though I already have them in my mind. Then this next spread I just divided into these 4 sections, and this will just be for the 4 weeks in February. I accidentally deleted some of the footage here of writing these titles, but basically I will just use these boxes to write a very simple overview of each week. And for me, doing this always helps me to see if I actually have enough time for everything I've planned. But then let's flip over to this other Dutch door spread. So I started this one here on the left with 2 more self-reflection type questions. So the first one will just simply be, how do I feel? And then the other one will give me some room to think about things I need to let go in life. This could be something more concrete, or it could be something a little bit more abstract. So maybe some things in your past or just something like that. I really enjoy using my bullet journal as a place to reflect on stuff like this and just to have a place to write out some thoughts. So I hope this will also give you some ideas for your own journals. But then the last page here will be a little bit more straightforward. So this will be more for the monthly reflection. So here I have these 2 boxes to write about things that worked in February and then things that didn't. The way I'm planning to use this whole section is to fill the first spread, so the planning side, in the beginning of the month, and then this reflection side will be filled in the last few days of the month. But that's it for this whole section, and now let's finally flip over to the last spread of this whole monthly theme, which will also be the most extravagant weekly layout I've ever created. I felt like I needed to throw one more crow to this theme so that it would tie together the style of the decorations at least a little bit more. So I kind of designed this whole first page arrangement around this bigger crow. I wanted this one to be flying so that the wings are out. And it's also taking the most space on this spread. And again, I started everything by just sketching out all these different elements with a pencil and figuring out the placements of everything. This phase always requires a lot of erasing as well, and I think I had around 4 different ideas for this page before I finally arrived to this final version. But then you probably know all the steps by now, but I still want to show you especially this outlining phase, so it will be a little bit easier to see how I drew everything in case you want to copy something to your own journals. This time I really tried to cover most of the space here so that the black background wouldn't be quite as overpowering. So there's this big flower in the bottom corner that's actually the same flower I drew on the monthly calendar spread, and then these same leaves and smaller flower groups continue on this spread as well. After the outlining, we are coloring the background black again, and I decided to leave this small sliver of white to this page that will also line with a gold border later. But actually, before finishing this page completely with the colors and everything, I wanted to finish this whole spread first to see how it all looked together. So we're gonna create another Dutch door layout for the weeklies. So I cut these next 2 pages for that. And then the right side of the last spread will have a matching flower arrangement design with the first one. This one actually ended up being quite similar with the monthly calendar design, but without the black feathers this time. Honestly, in this point, I was so tired and I had so many hours of footage already that I just couldn't come up with anything more unique anymore. But at least this one ended up matching the first page pretty well. But after everything was drawn and outlined, it was a little bit easier to see how this whole section is gonna be like. So next I started to color all these decorations with watercolors and the same gold paint. This time I also added some of that gold to the crow, and I think it helped to make it stand out against the black background a little bit more this time. But after that, all that was left was to actually fill the weekly sections. And I decided that it would probably be enough for me to have 1 week on 1 page. But if you like to have more space than that, you could easily double up the amount of pages here and then use 2 pages for 1 week. Then on this last page here, I decided to leave some room for this notes section and then also for a small monthly calendar that will make it easier to navigate through the weeklies this month. But then that's finally it for probably the most excessive monthly theme I've ever created. Honestly, this theme caused me so much stress and anxiety, but now looking at all of it, I'm so happy I decided to challenge myself with it. So even if this looks very difficult for you, all I want to say is that you never know what you're capable of if you don't give it a try. But anyway, I really hope you got some inspiration from this video. And if this was your first time here on the channel and you'd like to stay tuned for more, please consider subscribing. But other than that, I guess that's all for this time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are, and see you in my next one. Bye bye.